My name is Sophia Rose Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the Saturday morning I was reorganizing my spice cabinet when a little boy called my phone asking for his daddy. I want to tell you about the 11 seconds I stood completely still after I hung up, about how I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't do any of the things you might expect a woman to do when her entire marriage rearranges itself in a single phone call. I want to tell you about how I just finished alphabetizing the spices: paprika, rosemary, sage, thyme, because my hands needed something to do while my brain caught up to what had just happened. And I want to tell you what I found when I finally looked. If you're already feeling something, if something about those 11 seconds of silence hit you somewhere specific, go ahead and subscribe right now so you don't miss a single part of this. Hit like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm serious, I want to know, because something tells me the people who find this video aren't finding it by accident. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, in a house that looked completely fine from the outside. My dad coached high school football. Everybody loved him. He had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room when he was paying attention to you. The problem was figuring out when that would be. My mom kept everything spotless: the counters, the schedule, the surface of our family. She had a rule, unspoken but absolute: nothing is wrong. And if something is wrong, you don't name it, because naming it makes it real. I have one younger brother, Marcus. He moved to Portland years ago and calls twice a year, Christmas and my birthday sometimes. I don't hold it against him. He got out. I understand that impulse completely. The thing about growing up in a house where nothing is ever wrong is that you get very, very good at making yourself easy. You learn not to need too much. You learn not to ask twice. You learn to wait, quietly, without making it look like waiting. I got so good at it that by the time I was an adult, I had built an entire life around the architecture of not inconveniencing people. And if you've ever found yourself being easy, not because it's natural but because you learned it was safer, I think you're going to understand everything that comes next. If this is landing somewhere real for you, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now let me keep going. I put myself through the University of Tennessee on a partial scholarship and weekend waitress shifts. I majored in communications. I finished in 3.5 years because I couldn't afford the fourth. I graduated on a Saturday and was back at work by Monday because I had a shift and I needed the money, and nobody was throwing me a party anyway. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because I need you to understand who I was before Garrett. I was a woman who had been paying her own way since she was 18 years old and had quietly accepted that as the natural state of things. I was competent and self-sufficient, and I had never once in my life let anyone see me fall apart, because falling apart felt like the one luxury I couldn't afford. I met Garrett Calloway when I was 27. He was 30, broad-shouldered, easy-smiling, the kind of man who fills a room without seeming to try. He had his father's confidence and his mother Carol's warmth, or at least that's what I thought I was seeing. He made me feel chosen in a way I hadn't felt before. Not just wanted, chosen. Like he had looked at the whole room and decided I was the one worth knowing. We dated for 2 years and married in the spring. Carol cried at the ceremony. Happy tears, real ones. She held both my hands before I walked out and said, "You are exactly what this family needed." I have thought about that sentence a lot lately. The first year was good. The second was fine. By the third, Garrett had started working late regularly. Not alarmingly often, just often enough that it became the wallpaper of our life together. His job involved a lot of travel, a company card, and very little oversight. I accepted all of this because I was easy, because I had been trained my whole life not to name the things that felt wrong. When we started talking about children, I wanted them. I had always known I wanted them, in that quiet way you know things you've never said out loud. Garrett said he wanted to wait a little longer. I said okay. The following year, the subject simply stopped coming up. Not because we resolved it, it just disappeared from our house like a piece of furniture someone moved while I was at work. I want to pause on that for a second, Because I think the most dangerous kind of lie isn't the dramatic one. It's not the confrontation or the discovery or the moment everything breaks open. The most dangerous kind of lie is the slow one. The one that works by making you forget what you were even asking for. I had forgotten I was waiting for an answer. And then one Saturday morning in October, I was reorganizing the spice cabinet, because the quiet had gotten heavy again, the way it does when Garrett is traveling and the house holds its breath, and my phone rang. I assumed it was my mother, maybe Carol, asking if I needed anything from the farmer's market. I picked up without looking. Daddy? Small voice. A boy. 4 years old, maybe 5. I did not breathe. Daddy, I spilled juice and Mommy said to call you. There are moments in life that don't feel dramatic when they happen. They feel very, very quiet. This was one of those moments. I was standing at my kitchen counter in Garrett's oversized cream sweater. His sweater, the one I wore because it was a Saturday and I wasn't going anywhere, holding my phone, listening to a child ask for his father. Sweetie, I said, and my voice came out gentle, which surprised me. I think you have the wrong number. Is this Daddy's phone? No, baby, I don't think it is. I hung up. I stood still. I counted. I didn't mean to count, I just did. 11 seconds. Then I opened Garrett's contact in my phone. Then I opened my recent call log. 3 months earlier, Garrett had borrowed my phone to make a quick call when his battery was dead. I had handed it over without looking. Now, I scrolled back through my outgoing calls until I found a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. It was saved with a name. Eli, school. My husband had saved a child's school contact in my phone. And I had carried it around for 3 months without ever knowing it was there. I put the phone face down on the counter. I finished the spice cabinet. Cumin, garlic powder, oregano. I did every single one, and when every jar was in its place, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened a fresh page in the small notebook I keep for work, and I started making a list. Not a list of feelings, a list of facts. Everything I could recall. Every late night, every trip, every moment that had felt slightly off-key and that I had quietly retuned in my head to match the song I thought we were singing. The list was 2 pages long before I stopped writing. I sat there in Garrett's sweater, at our kitchen table, in our house, with our mortgage and our shared account, and our 6 years of marriage arranged around me like furniture. And I understood, with a clarity that didn't feel like clarity at all. It felt like the floor going cold, that I had been the last one waiting again, just like the velvet dress, just like the front steps, just like the gas station flowers that turned to dust. Only this time I was 34 years old, and I was not going to wait for anyone to come back for me. 1534. I did not call Garrett. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it matters more than anything else I could tell you about who I was becoming in that moment. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of calling Garrett when the dishwasher leaked, when the car made a noise, when I had a hard day at work and needed someone to tell me it would be fine. 6 years of reaching for him first, automatically, the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room you know by heart. I did not call him. I sat at that kitchen table until the light in the kitchen changed. That slow afternoon shift when everything goes amber and a little soft, and then I picked up my phone and called Carol instead. She answered on the second ring. She always answers on the second ring. I've noticed that about her. Never the first, like she wants you to know she wasn't just sitting there waiting, but never the third either, because she would never make you wonder. I didn't lead with it. I asked how she was. She said fine, asked about my week. And then I said, very evenly, Carol, I need to tell you something and I need you to just listen before you say anything. She said, okay, sweetheart. I read her the name from my phone. Eli, school. I told her about the call, the small voice, the juice, the daddy that wasn't Garrett's phone and yet absolutely was. I told her about the 2 pages of notes in my work notebook. I told her all of it in the same tone I use when I'm presenting a client report. Steady, sequential, no extra air in the sentences. When I finished, there was a silence on Carol's end that lasted just a beat too long. Not shock, recognition. "How long have you suspected something was wrong?" I asked her. "I didn't know," she said. "I want to be clear with you. I did not know. But last Christmas, when he stepped outside for that long phone call and came back in with that look on his face," she stopped. "I told myself I was imagining things." "You weren't." "No," a breath. "I wasn't." She was at my door within the hour. She brought a grocery store pie, peach because it's my favorite and she remembered without being reminded, and she set it on the counter and neither of us ever touched it. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and we did the math together. Out loud, carefully, like two people auditing something they didn't want to find errors in, but needed to be accurate about. The late nights that started roughly 2 years ago. The business trips that increased. The way the conversation about children had simply evaporated from our house. The way Garrett had become, in the last year especially, slightly more, I want to be careful with this word, managed with me. Like he was maintaining something rather than living inside it. Like our marriage had quietly become a performance he was keeping up, rather than a life he was actually in. Carol kept saying, "I should have," and I kept saying, "You didn't know." And she would say, "But I felt it." And I would say, "Feeling something isn't the same as knowing." We went around that loop 3 times before I realized we were both talking about ourselves. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you scroll past. Have you ever felt something shift in someone close to you? Something quiet? Something you couldn't point to? And talked yourself out of naming it because naming it felt more dangerous than not knowing? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one and I genuinely want to know. Because I don't think I'm the only person who confused loyalty with looking away. The Monday after that Saturday, I took my lunch break and met with a private investigator in a small office above a dry cleaner 2 miles from my workplace. I had found him through reviews. He had a flat rate, a clean professional website, and exactly 1 photograph on it, which was of his door. No face. I respected that immediately. I brought a manila folder I had prepared that morning before work. Garrett's full name, employer, vehicle make and model, license plate number, the dates of his last 4 trips, and the phone number saved in my call log as Eli. School. The investigator looked at the folder and then looked at me and said, "You've done this before." I said, "I coordinate accounts for a living. I organize information." He nodded like that explained something. Maybe it did. I did not cry in his office. I had cried once, the Sunday morning between the phone call and that meeting, in the shower, with the water running loud enough that if anyone had been home, they wouldn't have heard. I gave myself exactly as long as the hot water held out. Then I turned it off, got dressed, and went back to the kitchen table and my notebook. 12 days later, the investigator called me at work. I took the call in the stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floor because it was the only place in the building with reliable privacy. He told me he had everything I needed. He used that phrase specifically, everything you need. I wrote it down in my notebook even though I didn't need to. I picked up the folder from his office that evening. I sat in my car in the parking lot across the street and opened it. There were photographs. A woman, dark hair, practical cut, petite and quick-looking even in still images. An apartment building in a part of Nashville I didn't know well. And a child, a little boy with gray-blue eyes and his father's exact jaw, photographed from across a parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a sippy cup in one hand and reaching up for Garrett's hand with the other. 4 years old. Maybe just turned 4. Which meant that Garrett had been with this woman since before Eli could walk. Before Eli could talk. Before Eli could dial a phone to tell his daddy he spilled juice. Before Garrett sat across from me at our kitchen table and said maybe we should wait a little longer. I stayed in that parking lot for a long time. I don't know exactly how long enough that the light changed twice and a parking enforcement officer walked past my car and looked in, and I must have looked sufficiently normal because he kept walking. The woman's name was Brianna Holst. She was 29 years old. She was an ultrasound technician at a regional hospital. She had dark brown straight hair cut to her shoulder and, according to a secondary document in the folder, had been telling people for over a year that her boyfriend was almost divorced. He had told her he was separated. He had told me he was stressed about work. He had built two women each a partial version of him, and neither of us had the whole picture. And he had been walking between those two pictures for 2 years, managing the distance between them. That, somehow, was the thing that finally made me cry again. Not the betrayal, not even the child, the geometry of it, the specific effort it took to maintain that kind of distance. Because it isn't passive. Having two lives doesn't happen by accident. You have to work at it. You have to make choices constantly, small ones and large ones every single day. Garrett had made thousands of choices to deceive me. Thousands of mornings he woke up and chose again. I drove home. I made dinner, pasta, because it required very little thought. I ate alone because Garrett was in Memphis, or wherever Garrett actually was, and I washed the dish and dried it and put it away. I went to bed in the middle of the bed, which I never do, and I slept better than I had in months. I think the body knows things before the brain is ready to act on them. I think some part of me had been bracing for something for a long time, without having a name for what I was bracing against. And now I had a name, and an address, and a manila folder, and the name of a family attorney I had already looked up and had an appointment with for that Thursday afternoon. I had one more thing to do before Thursday. I called a locksmith for Friday. I was not going to be the last one waiting. Not this time. Not in my own house. Not in his sweater. I had spent 6 years being the easy one, the capable one, the one who held things together quietly while someone else figured out what they wanted. I had spent 6 years mistaking my own steadiness for love and someone else's avoidance for complexity. I knew exactly what I was going to put on the kitchen table, and I knew exactly what I was going to say. The attorney's name was Patricia Wend, and her office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, with a waiting room that had exactly the right amount of quiet in it. Not cold, just composed. She had been practicing family law for 19 years, and she had the kind of stillness that tells you a person has sat across from a lot of pain without flinching. I laid everything out for her the same way I had laid it out for the investigator. The folder, the dates, the photographs, the timeline I had reconstructed from memory and bank statements, and the call log on my phone. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I could say. When I finished, she looked at the documents for a moment, and then she looked at me and said, "You're very organized." "I coordinate accounts for a living," I said. Same answer I gave the investigator. By that point, it felt like the truest thing I knew about myself. She walked me through everything I needed to understand. The process, the documentation, the financial picture, which was more complicated than I had anticipated because of the way our accounts were structured, and because Garrett had, I learned that afternoon, been quietly maintaining what amounted to a second household without my knowledge. Expenses that had never appeared obviously wrong on their own, but that, laid out in sequence, told a very clear story. I drove home from that appointment, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a while. Not paralyzed, just thinking. The house looked exactly the same as it always had from the outside. Same dark shutters, same porch light that came on automatically at dusk, same hydrangeas along the front walk that I had planted 3 springs ago because I thought we were building something here. Something that would grow. I went inside. I opened my laptop. I transferred $11,400 from a savings account I had been building privately for 3 years into a new individual account I had opened that morning before my appointment. I had never told Garrett about that savings account. I want to be honest about that. I built it slowly, quietly, over 3 years, putting away whatever I could manage from my paychecks into an account that existed only in my name. I have asked myself since whether I knew, somewhere underneath everything, that I would need it. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is that some part of me, the part that grew up watching my mother make herself smaller and my father forget to show up, had decided a long time ago that I would always have a door I could walk through on my own. That account was the door. I called Carol that evening. I told her I had seen the attorney. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "Do you need me to come over Thursday night?" I said yes. Garrett came home Thursday evening at 7:14. I know the exact time because I had been watching the driveway from the kitchen window, not anxiously, precisely. He had his laptop bag over one shoulder and his travel duffel over the other, and he came through the door already talking, something about traffic on the interstate, and then he stopped. Because I had put everything on the kitchen table, the photographs, the investigator's report, the attorney's preliminary documents, his son's school contact saved in my phone. I had written the name out on a piece of paper and placed it at the center of everything, like a caption. Eli, school. In my handwriting, on my paper, in our house. Garrett's face did the thing I had seen it do before, the rearranging, the performance of remorse assembling itself behind his eyes before he had decided what version of the story he was going to tell. He set down the laptop bag. He set down the duffel. He opened his mouth. Sophia, I never meant for this to... Stop, I said. He stopped. He tried again 30 seconds later. Something about the complexity of the situation. Something about how it happened slowly and he didn't know how to... Stop, I said again. The third time he tried to begin a sentence, I didn't even say the word. I just looked at him. And something in that look, I don't know exactly what it was, maybe the fact that I wasn't crying, maybe the fact that I was standing in my own sweater this time, not his. Something in it made him understand that none of his usual architectures were going to work here. He sat down at the table. He looked at the photographs for a long time. How long? He said finally. Not, how did you find out? How long have you known? Like what mattered to him was how much time I'd had to prepare, not what I'd been living inside of. Long enough, I said. I am not going to tell you I felt powerful in that moment, because I didn't. I felt tired in a way that went all the way down. I felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding something heavy for so long that putting it down doesn't feel like relief yet. It just feels like your arms finally stopping. And right there, in that exhaustion, in the middle of what should have been the worst moment of my adult life, I felt something else beginning. Not happiness, not victory, something quieter than both of those things. Something that had been waiting underneath all the weight for a very long time. If that feeling makes sense to you, if you know what it is to be so tired of carrying something that putting it down feels less like freedom and more like finally, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what comes next is the part I didn't see coming, and I think you need to hear it. I need you to leave, I said to Garrett, tonight. He looked up from the photographs. His face had gone through several arrangements by then, and had settled into something I can only describe as deflated. Not broken. Garrett was never going to break dramatically. He was just going to slowly run out of the performance he had been maintaining and have nothing underneath it to offer instead. Sophia. I'm not asking for an explanation, I said. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to leave. He left. He took his duffel bag, the one he'd brought home from the trip, and he walked back out the front door, and he got in his car, and he drove away. I stood at the kitchen window and I watched the taillights until they were gone. Carol arrived 11 minutes later. She must have been parked around the corner waiting, because there is no way she drove from her house to mine in 11 minutes otherwise. She came in without knocking. She has a key, has always had a key, and she didn't say anything at first. She just came and stood beside me at the kitchen window, even though there was nothing left to see in the driveway. We stood there together for a while. Then she said, I owe you an apology. I said, you didn't know. I felt it, she said, and I looked away, and that's not the same as not knowing. I didn't argue with her this time, because she was right, and she deserved to be right about it, and I loved her enough to let her carry that honestly. 3 days after Garrett left my house, someone knocked on my front door at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning. I was working from home that day. I had a conference call in 40 minutes and I was on my second cup of coffee, and I was genuinely, for the first time in almost 2 weeks, managing to think about something other than the folder on my kitchen table. And then the knock came. I opened the door. Brianna Holst was standing on my porch. She was smaller than the photographs. Dark hair, straight, cut to the shoulder. Jeans and a gray Henley, no makeup. She had the look of someone who had made a decision and was now executing it before she could change her mind. Jaw set, eyes direct, hands in her jacket pockets. We looked at each other for a moment. I stepped back and held the door open. I don't know exactly why. Something about her face, not the guilt in it, not the apology already forming, but the directness. She had come here herself, on her own, to say something she had decided needed to be said. I understood that impulse completely. She walked in. I led her to the kitchen table, that same kitchen table that had become the stage for everything in the past 2 weeks. And we sat down across from each other. She said, "I want you to know that I didn't know." "I believe you," I said, and I did. She told me about the bill that arrived at her apartment with Garrett's name on it, listing an address that was not hers. How she ran his full name after that. How it took her less than 40 minutes to find our marriage record, our address, and a photograph of our wedding posted publicly by a mutual acquaintance from 6 years ago. "He told me you were the one who wouldn't let him go," she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear what it was costing her to be steady. "That you'd fall apart without him, that he felt responsible for you." I sat with that for a moment, the specific shape of it, the way Garrett had needed to make me fragile in the story he told Brianna, so that his staying made him look generous rather than duplicitous. "He told me you were almost divorced," I said. She nodded. Just once. A small, precise movement. "I think," she said, "he needed to believe something specific about both of us, so that what he was doing had a logic he could live inside of." She stood to go. She didn't ask for anything. Not my forgiveness, not my sympathy, not an alliance. She had come to say one true thing, and she had said it. At the door, she stopped. She turned back. "I think he was wrong about you," she said, "for whatever that's worth." I closed the door behind her. I stood in my hallway for a long moment. Then I went back to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and joined my conference call 3 minutes early. I want to tell you about the weeks after because I think that's the part nobody talks about. Everyone wants to know about the confrontation, the moment of discovery, the dramatic turning point where everything cracks open and the truth spills out. And yes, those things happened. I've told you exactly how they happened. But the part that actually changed me wasn't the Thursday night with the photographs on the kitchen table. It wasn't Brianna on my porch. It wasn't even the phone call from the little boy who just wanted his daddy and accidentally dismantled my entire life in 30 seconds. The part that changed me was everything after. The divorce was uncontested. Garrett did not fight me. I think he was too occupied managing the simultaneous discovery of 2 women who now had the full picture. Neither of us confused, neither of us waiting for an explanation, to generate the energy required for a legal battle on top of it. His attorney sent a single counter-proposal on one minor financial point. My attorney responded. The counter-proposal was withdrawn within a week. Patricia Wend called me when it was finalized and said, "That moved quickly." I said, "He's a man who avoids conflict." She said, "Most of them are." I learned what happened next through Carol, who still called every Sunday and who had, in the aftermath of everything, become something even more essential to me than she had been before. Not because she owed me, she kept saying she did, and I kept telling her she didn't, but because she chose to show up, specifically and deliberately, in a way that her son never had. She told me that Garrett had moved into Brianna's apartment initially, which lasted approximately 6 weeks before Brianna asked him to leave. I don't know the details of that conversation, and I didn't ask. What I know is that Brianna, who had spent 2 years waiting for a man she believed was almost free, discovered within those 6 weeks of actual proximity that the version of him she had been given was as carefully managed as the version he had given me. Different architecture, same architect. He moved into a corporate apartment. He started driving a cheaper car. The lease on the one I had seen in the investigator's photographs apparently couldn't sustain the financial reality of 2 households collapsing simultaneously. Small things, logical consequences, the natural physics of a life built on sustained deception finally running out of the energy required to maintain it. I did not feel satisfied when Carol told me these things. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a version of this story where I'm supposed to feel vindicated, and I didn't. Not exactly. I felt something more like a deep, settled tiredness, the kind that comes after a long effort has finally concluded. The kind that isn't unhappy, just finished. What I felt most clearly, in those weeks, was the specific texture of my own life without someone else's secrets living inside it. My apartment. I found it within 3 weeks of Garrett leaving the house, a two-bedroom on the third floor of a building with a small balcony that faces east, was quieter than the house had been. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not a held breath, not an absence, just space, my space. The furniture was mostly new, because most of what we'd owned together felt like it belonged to a version of my life I was done curating. I kept the kitchen table. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because so much had happened at that table that it had become, strangely, mine. Carol came for dinner twice in the first month. She brought wine the first time and ingredients the second time, and we cooked together in my small kitchen, and she told me things about her own marriage that she had never said out loud to anyone. About the year her husband had the emotional affair, about the choice she made to stay, and the questions she still carried about whether that was the right one. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," she said, stirring something on my stove with her back to me. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that I understand something about choosing yourself, even when it's the harder thing. And I want you to know I think you did it right." I didn't say anything. I just stood beside her and handed her the wooden spoon when she needed it. Some people came back. A colleague from work who had gone quiet during the worst of it sent me a message saying she hadn't known what to say and was sorry for the silence. I appreciated the honesty of that more than I would have appreciated a more polished apology. I told her so. We had lunch. An old friend from college, a woman named Deb who I had drifted from over the years in the way you drift from people when you get married and your lives reorganize around different centers, texted me out of nowhere on a Wednesday afternoon and said she'd heard through someone that I was going through something hard, and did I want to get coffee? We got coffee. It turned into 3 hours and 2 refills and a conversation I hadn't had with anyone in years. The kind where you say the real thing instead of the acceptable version of it. Deb said at one point, "I always thought you seemed so settled, like you had everything figured out." I said, "I know. I worked very hard at that." She laughed. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed about any of it, and it felt like something unlocking. Not everyone came back. There were people, acquaintances mostly, one person I had considered a closer friend, who had absorbed Garrett's version of events early on and built their understanding of the situation around that foundation, and who found it easier to maintain that understanding than to revise it. I noticed their absence, and I let it be an absence. I did not chase anyone. I did not make a case for myself. I had spent enough of my life arranging myself to be palatable to people who had already decided what they thought of me. I wrote one letter, not to Garrett. I had nothing left to say to Garrett that the kitchen table hadn't already said more precisely than words. I wrote it to myself, which sounds strange, but stay with me. I wrote it the night before the divorce was finalized. I sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, in my apartment, with the east-facing balcony and the new furniture and the spice cabinet I had reorganized according to my own system, and I wrote down everything I wanted to remember about who I had been and who I was becoming. Not a list of grievances, not a catalog of what had been done to me, a record of what I had learned about the difference between being easy and being loved, about the difference between keeping the peace and actually having it. The central thing I wrote, the sentence I kept coming back to, the one I rewrote 4 times before it was right, was this: being uncomplicated is not the same as being happy, and being chosen is not the same as being seen. I called Carol the next morning and read it to her over the phone. There was a pause on her end, and then she said, very quietly, "Write that down somewhere you'll see it." I said, "I just did." She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else. "You're going to be just fine," she said. "You already are." I think about Eli sometimes, the little boy with the gray-blue eyes and his father's jaw. I think about the fact that he is 4 years old and completely innocent of everything that happened, and that he is growing up in a situation that was not of anyone's choosing except the one person who had all the choices. I hope he has people around him who show up. I hope his mother is okay. I think, based on the woman who sat across from me at my kitchen table for 20 minutes and said the hard thing plainly and then left without asking for anything, that she probably is. I am 34 years old. My name is Sophia Rose Calloway, or it will be, once the last of the paperwork processes back to my birth name, which I requested because it turns out I was always more Sophia Rose than I was Sophia Rose Calloway, and I would like to be accurately named going forward. I am in my apartment on a Sunday morning. The light comes in from the east balcony and hits the kitchen table at an angle that makes it look almost golden. I have coffee, and I have the notebook I've been keeping since October, nearly full now, and I have the compass charm at my collarbone that my mother gave me when I left for college and that I have never once taken off, not even through all of it. I am not waiting for anyone. I am not bracing for anything. I am just here, in my own space, in my own quiet, which is not a held breath anymore. It's just a Sunday morning, and it's mine. Before you go, I want to ask you something real. Has someone ever told you a story about yourself? Who you are, what you need, how much you can handle? And have you ever caught yourself believing it, quietly over time, the way you believe something that's repeated often enough? And if you have, what was the moment you stopped? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. If this story stayed with you, if something in it landed somewhere true, like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And share it with someone who needs to be reminded that being easy is not the same as being loved, and that knowing the difference is not a small thing. It is, actually, everything.